I have been a graphic designer for 3 years, and in that time, I have heard so much misinformation about the golden ratio. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about what about the golden ratio annoys me, but also how designers use it. So, first of all, what is the golden ratio? It's sometimes called the perfect ratio or the divine proportion, and it's the average ratio found in a repeating set of squares where the length of the new square is equal to the length of the previous two. So let me show you what I mean by that. We have two squares. If I create a new square and I match the length of the new square to the length of the previous two, that's where it starts. And then we repeat this over and over, like so. And eventually, we'll end up with something like this. Now, when you measure the length and the width of this new rectangle created by all of these, it averages out to about the golden ratio. So it is represented by the Greek letter phi, and it is a mathematical equation calculated as 1 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2. Which when you actually math that out, it's equal to about 1.618. So when you divide the length of this rectangle by the width, on average, you get somewhere around 1.618. So this ratio has an association with the Fibonacci sequence. And the Fibonacci sequence is a series of numbers where the next number is the sum of the previous two. So I know that sounds kind of weird, but we're going to start here with a 1 and a 1. And what we do is we add these two numbers together to get the next number. So 1 plus 1 is 2. And then we take the previous two numbers and add them for the next number. So 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8. And so on and so forth. So you get a large repeating series of numbers that looks something like this. You can also build Fibonacci sequences starting with a different set of numbers. So for example, 2 and 2. So we could start with a 2 and a 2, and we'd get 4. And then if we add 2 and 4, we get 6, and then 10, and then 16, and then 26, and then 42, and then 68, and then 110, and it just goes on. And I'm going to do one more. We're going to start with a 3 and a 4, and then we get 7, 11. This gets us 18, 29, 47, 76, 123, and so on. You kind of get the idea. That's what the Fibonacci sequence is. Now, here's something that's kind of cool about the Fibonacci sequence is if you take a number and you divide it by the previous number, on average, you get about the golden ratio. So if we take 144 and we divide it by 89, here's what we get. We get 1.61797. Let me move this over so you can see it. Which here we can just go ahead and say this is approximately 1.618, like that. So that's the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence and kind of how they're connected. What we can do with this golden ratio is we already have this set of squares here. We can also create a set of circles that are proportionate to each other just by drawing a circle inside the square. So all of these things fit in here. I didn't draw that circle right. There we go, kind of like that and like that. Now we get a set of proportional circles. So we have proportional circles, we have proportional squares, we have the Fibonacci sequence, which, by the way, a quick story about this sequence. Fibonacci, his name was Leonardo Bonacci. The origin of this sequence is actually a solution to a math problem where the question was asked, what would the population of rabbits be in a few years if you just started with one pair of rabbits? I'm trying to draw rabbit ears here, but it's being super slow. I don't know why it's being so slow. I think it's because I'm recording. Anyhow, so the question was asked, what would the population of rabbits be in a few years if you just started with one pair of rabbits? And this formula, this sequence of numbers, is Fibonacci's answer to that question. So this ratio and the Fibonacci sequence are actually very mathematical and very much based on just math. The question after this point is, how do designers use the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence in their designs? Well, I will show you, and it's actually kind of cool. So what I'm going to do is, you know what, I'll just create a new artboard here of my page. So this is my page for a magazine. It's about this, it's pretty much the size of a magazine, and we're going to draw a rectangle over this. Now here's what's cool about this, is if we take the width or the length and we divide it by the golden ratio, so divide it by 1.618, we get that. We get, it resizes to this. Now, here's what's cool about this, is if we resize this rectangle by the golden ratio so we're going to divide this again by 1.618, we get this size of a rectangle. Now, this rectangle will fit perfectly in the open space left by this rectangle created from the overall design. So if I bring this over, it'll fit perfectly in there. So this is where the idea of it being a perfect proportion comes from, because if you divide a square or if you divide a rectangle by the golden ratio, the leftover space can be filled with the next series of smaller or bigger rectangles. So that's pretty cool. So if I go here and I divide the height by 1.618, and then I divide the height by 1.618 again, the leftover space gets filled up by the next rectangle that we can create. So by doing that, we actually created a layout here. So if we wanted, I could convert this to a picture frame and bring in an image here. And then I can have some type of headline here. So let's pretend like this is our headline. This will be our sub headline, which this will be a little bit bigger. And then here on the right side, we could have a whole column of body copy. There we go, like that. We'll pretend like that looks good. So very quickly and pretty easily, we can create a proportionate layout with the golden ratio. There's more that we can do with this. So we can use these series of proportional squares and circles to create logos. So if I take this circle, let's just kind of try to combine this into something here. I'm going to be really kind of quick and dirty with it. I want to share a funny story about the golden ratio. So I was watching a video from a designer, and he was glazing the golden ratio, pretty much was the point of the video. And to emphasize his point, he did what I'm doing now. He did a time lapse to recreate the Twitter bird logo using only the circles from the golden ratio. So they could not be resized and they had to stay as they were. That is kind of the point of the exercise. There's no changing the circles because they're already perfect circles, because they're perfectly proportioned by the perfect ratio, right? That's the idea. So this designer was sitting there, and he was putting the logo together, and one of the circles just wasn't working. It wasn't lining up. It was too big, and it was throwing off the whole thing. And you know what he did? He resized the circle. He completely resized it, which completely threw out the point he was trying to make, that you can only use the golden ratio to make this logo. I legitimately like had a little belly laugh when I watched that happen because it invalidated his argument entirely. And I'll get into a little bit later what I think about the golden ratio. I think people are a little ridiculous with it, but for now you can see I legitimately didn't resize any circles. I did create a circle, but this is a logo designed only with the golden ratio. And I'm not going to pretend like this is the best logo ever. I mean, it's definitely not. But it gets the point across that you can create logos using these proportion circles off of the golden ratio. Another way that designers use the golden ratio is for determining the point size for their headers and subheaders. So for example, this is my header. It's 80.3 points. Now what I can do is copy it, and I can actually do math up here in the point size window. So you can do this in Illustrator and InDesign, I'm pretty sure. And you just do divide, and I'm going to do 1.618 times 2 because I want to shrink it down by the golden ratio twice, basically. So by hitting enter, it shrinks it down like that. And now we can write our subheader like this. There we go. And then if I really wanted to, I could proportion the point size of the body to the point size of the subheader. I'm going to do 1.618 times that by 2 because I want to shrink it down twice. And it didn't work. Hold on. Divide 1.618. Boom. There we go. And we get 8 points, which is actually exactly what this is set to already. So now all of my grids and my layouts and my point sizes are all proportional based off of the golden ratio in this layout. And there we go. Check it out. A layout designed off of the golden ratio. Pretty neat. As I mentioned earlier, the Fibonacci sequence does have a relation to the golden ratio, and I want to show you how designers use the Fibonacci sequence in design as well. So this sequence is pretty fascinating. So first of all, I'll show you how we can use this sequence to determine point size and leading. Here in my layout, I have created a new paragraph of body copy, and I'm going to set this to the Fibonacci sequence point size 13. I'm going to go 13. So it looks like that. And then what I can do, I actually line these up intentionally, is we have 13 here, and we have 16 directly underneath it. What I can do is my point size is 13, so my leading will be 16 points, like that. So now I have a proportional point size and leading based off of the Fibonacci sequence. So point size is 13, my leading is 16. If I had a bigger paragraph, so let's say that our point size is going to be 16. So let's set this to 16. The next associated number on the next sequence is 18. So these are in the same position in the sequence. So the point size will be 16 and the leading will be 18. So that creates a point size to leading ratio that looks pretty darn good in my opinion. And the Fibonacci sequence is one of my favorite ways to implement the golden ratio, especially in type. A lot of times too, these numbers are defaulted in the program that you're using, and I'm pretty sure this is how they're figuring it out. The next way that designers use the Fibonacci sequence in their designs is to create grids. Grids are super useful, and we're going to start with a rectangle like this. And the size is kind of arbitrary, you know, I'm not basing it off of anything, but we're going to start with 1, and then the next one is 2. So I'm going to take this exact rectangle, but I'm going to go and place 2 of them there. Now I'm going to take this, and to follow the sequence, the next one is 3. So there's 3, and then the next one is 5. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 8 is our next one. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. after this is 13. What I can do too is just copy all 8 of these. So that's 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, I messed that up. I gotta line this up properly. It's not wanting to connect. There it is. See if that'll work. There we go. And that is 11, but we're off the page, so it's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these, I'm going to unify them, take these 8 and unify them, take these 5 and unify them. Because what I'm going to do is this creates a neat little grid. So I'm going to take this block of 2, move it up, take this block of 3, move it up, block of 5, block of 8. Like so. Now I will group all of these together and just scale it up so that it covers the whole page. And now you can see we have a horizontal grid with exponentially larger sections. Now what I can do is I can duplicate this and flip it 90 degrees, and that creates a grid on my page. So I can leave it like this, or I can drag grid markers down and place them on each of the sections if I want. And then I can use this grid to design posters or layouts or whatever. Now I do want to note there seems to be this stigma, if that's the word, in the design community that by using the golden ratio, you're automatically going to come up with some just beautiful designs no matter what. So I wanted to disprove that a little bit here by intentionally creating a not so good looking design while still sticking strictly to the golden ratio, because this ratio isn't a cheat code for good visuals. There's still technique and there's still effort and work that goes into making something look good, which I guess designers just seem to ignore because they want to deify, you could say, a ratio, an irrational number. It's a little insane to me. All right, that's all I'm saying. Anyhow, this is the design. I don't think it really looks that great. But in the next video, I'm going to redesign this using the same grid and the same elements to create something that will actually look decent using this ratio. And I actually go to some more advanced techniques, which you might be interested in seeing. Because here's the thing. Design, even with the golden ratio and even with good proportions, it still requires a specific eye and a certain understanding of how to arrange things. So it's just because you're using the golden ratio, it's not a free excuse to throw random things on the page and then think that it's perfect. That's definitely not the case. So I feel like I gave a pretty solid overview of what the golden ratio is and how it relates to the Fibonacci sequence and how to use it in a design. Now, I have an unpopular opinion, and I want to go into my beef with the golden ratio. Okay, it's not so much with the ratio itself, it's more of the reputation of the ratio. So I mentioned earlier, but I feel like there's this idea from designers that simply using it will make everything pretty, and that's definitely not the case. You can use the golden ratio to make some pretty lousy layouts. And I feel like people get trapped in this box of only using the golden ratio because of this reputation the internet has attached to it. And so they don't branch out to try other proportions. So for example, this ratio, this layout is perfectly suitable. It's a pretty cohesive and fine layout. I don't think there's really anything wrong with this. Well, this layout does not use the golden ratio. It uses the square root of 2. I use the square root of 2 to proportion this thing. So you definitely don't need the golden ratio to make good looking designs. There's a whole nother aspect of the golden ratio that really grinds my gears, and it's the mysticism and the superstition that is placed on this ratio. Now, I'm not gonna go into it too much. It's a whole rant in and of itself, but the golden ratio is a mathematical equation, and that's it. Like, this was discovered or thought up by Fibonacci when he was trying to calculate the population of rabbits. So things like faces being proportional with a golden spiral, which I know you've seen this thing. It looks like this, the golden spiral. This thing drives me crazy. The way that people use this spiral makes absolutely no sense. Because here's the thing. They claim that there's representations of the spiral in nature, and that's just not the case if you try to scrutinize it even a little bit. So the thing about a spiral, any spiral, is that the center point of the spiral is supposed to kind of dictate or showcase a focal point. The thing in the center is important, and that just doesn't happen when people are using the golden spiral to try and draw some type of connection with nature or things like that. So for example, I know everyone has seen this Nautilus shell and the spiral drawn over the Nautilus shell. And you can find it in so many other things. I'm not going to go over too much, but the claim is that this spiral is found in nature and it's divinely proportioned, and it doesn't make sense because if you actually trace the spiral of the shell, you can see it immediately breaks the spiral of the golden ratio. So it just doesn't work. There's actually very little correlation with this spiral and nature. So things like faces being proportioned with the golden spiral is complete BS. Because if the center point of a spiral is a focal point, then there's a whole lot of stuff about a face that doesn't make sense. So this random point above the eyebrow doesn't make sense. And the thing too is like these curves don't make much sense either, because if you look at the ear starts here and then it breaks the spiral here, and it doesn't follow it. So it seems like if there's a curve at all, people will draw the golden spiral on top of it. So this is one that I did. I drew this curve here to show that this is a beautiful design, isn't it? Except the spiral doesn't link to anything, and the curve like barely touches the football. And yet people do this all the time with Da Vinci. The focal point of this picture is not the nose, it's the eyes. And yet they're drawing the spiral on the nose. There's a whole lot. I'm not going to get into a rant. But it's either the curve doesn't line up or the spiral doesn't line up. So here's the thing. The golden ratio is genuinely very cool and very useful for designers. However, this deification idea and almost worship of a mathematical equation is just a little bit absurd to me. In fact, I read an article once saying that the golden ratio will make your life better by using symbols that represent or contain the ratio. It will connect you with the divine, which will balance your stress. Like, what? It's called you're sitting there meditating and trying to be intentional about lowering your stress. And guess what? When you do that, your stress goes down. So it's not because of some spiral on a seashell, which, by the way, the spiral doesn't even line up. Same with all these other examples. It doesn't make sense. So if you want to see some examples of how to properly use the golden spiral, I have prepared something for you. Are you prepared for this? Oh my goodness. This is a divine proportion. Oh, wow. This is the most, legitimately like the most accurate golden spiral application that I've seen. Look at this big boy. That is a chunker of a bear. We'll just ignore the warping there, right? And look at this guy. That is a divine proportion, am I right? Look, it actually makes sense. It curves with the belly, and then there's a focal point of like whatever this thing is on his hip, right? This is what peak performance looks like. And then people say my posture is bad. No, my posture is based off of the golden spiral, guys. I have perfect posture. I have beautiful posture. And then I mentioned, faces don't make sense with the golden spiral. Well, if we actually align features to the center point of the spiral, we get this. That that is a beautiful man. Oh my goodness. Perfect proportions, baby. Wow. The golden spiral truly is so inspiring. Okay, thanks for enjoying the memes with me, and hope you learned something. Peace out.